Hello, everyone, and welcome to the School Leadership Show. We are missing my co-host, Mike Dowdy, but he'll be back soon. Today, I'm excited to talk about a book on a topic that is of the utmost importance right now. That is the topic of trust, more specifically, trust in schools. We're going to talk about the book Trust Matters: Leadership for Successful Schools with the author, Megan Tshannen-Moran. Megan is a professor emeritus of educational leadership at William and Mary School of Education. And before that, she spent 14 years as the founding principal of a school in Chicago. Her research has been on trust in school settings and how this is related to important things that the listeners of this podcast care about, such as the collective efficacy beliefs of teachers, teacher professionalism, and how trust is connected to student achievement. About 10 years ago, I summarized her book, Trust Matters, because that's when it was published, about 2014. And I chose it because I like the way this book provided enough theory to help us understand how trust works, along with lots of practical, specific examples of how trust building and trust breaking occurs in schools. And I was also impressed and a bit surprised by how strongly the research confirms the importance of trust in student performance, teacher retention, and other crucial elements of success. So with all of that, I'd like to welcome Megan to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you, Jen.
Thanks for taking the time. I know it's a busy time when we're recording this holiday season. Could we start with the research? So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what is the impact? What does research say the impact is of having strong trust or weaker or no trust in schools?
Yeah, trust is remarkable in its predictive power among variables ever since the 1960s when the Coleman report came out, and the statistical analysis seemed, or at least the interpretations at that time, seemed to indicate that it was students' background that made the difference to their achievement, rather than the schools. And this was, during the time of desegregation and, moving kids to from low-income communities into more affluent communities, to see if they would do better. And what the report seemed to say was that socioeconomic status was the big driver of students' achievement. And so we as educators, like, no, that's not right. What we do matters.
Yeah. Yes.
It's exactly that it's important. We know we're making a difference, and we see it every day in the lives of our students. So this is just maddening that at the statistical level, SES ends up being such a strong predictor. And so that set us on a 5-decade-long search as researchers to say there's got to be variables that that outstrip socioeconomic status in terms of their predictive power over student achievement. And it turns out now that we have, and trust is one of them. Trust is one of a trio of very highly correlated variables that hold their predictive power even in the presence of socioeconomic status as a predictor. So that is trust, and specifically the trust between teachers and students, trust within the walls of the classroom, and collective efficacy, which John Hattie has helped become something that very much on the minds of educators and is very important. And then academic press, the culture around academics within a school community. So my advisor, several of my colleagues sort of saw how closely those three variables were related to each other and called the package deal academic optimism.
Academic optimism. Oh, that's a great turn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what it just points us to is that when you have high trust, you are also very likely to have high collective efficacy
Mm,
and seriousness about the academic process within schools.
mm,
Where one of those falls down, they're all likely to fall down, and your achievement levels among the students is very likely to suffer as well.
So those three areas that are predictive of student success, it's almost like a stool. You would need all three of those.
Three-legged school, yeah, exactly, exactly. They work very closely together.
Hmm. When you first set out to study trust, did you get any pushback with people saying, "Oh, trust, like building trust, that's a soft skill."
Yeah, actually, yes. When I was in graduate school, the superintendent of my own children's school system was an adjunct professor at the university. And we happened to run into each other in the hall one day. And he's like, tell me about your program. How are you doing? Have you started your dissertation? And I said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I'm going to study trust. And he kind of rolled his eyes and he said, what's there to know about trust? It's good when you have it. It's not good when you don't. Like, that's the story. Like, how are you going to turn that into a whole dissertation?
Wow, you showed him. Oh, trust is everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, it is. I mean, he's right in the sense of like, I mean, trust is
it's good when you
everything.
have it. Yes.
Yeah, it's like the air you breathe, right? You take it for granted when it's there. When it's not there, boy, do things blow up, right?
Exactly,
Um,
exactly that. And now, 25 years later, we just have such a strong body of evidence of just how powerful it is. In one study, that and then the results may be somewhat inflated because I had kind of a bimodal sample of a middle income suburban district and an urban mostly low income urban environment, but as my sample. But within that sample, trust, a set of five trust variables: trust between teachers and principals, trust between teacher colleagues, trust of students, the teachers' trust of students and students' trust of teachers, and trust the parents' trust in the school. Those five variables combined explain 78% of the variance in student achievement.
wow,
Like,
wow.
exactly. Wow. Where else do we see things that, such powerful predictive value in any of the things that we study as educational researchers? It is
Wow.
very, very powerful.
Very powerful. And we'll get into some of those skills. Do we have a better name now, for those types of what we used to call, I always hated soft skills, like interpersonal skills, or what would you categorize that type of leadership skill? Building trust, building efficacy, building culture. What are those? What
Yeah,
do we call
well, now we call it social emotional learning or
social?
emotional intelligence.
Okay.
But I think you could be emotionally intelligent and not trustworthy. So from a
Mm,
leadership point of view, we need to have some clarity about when are we talking about trustworthiness, and then when are we talking about being trusting, being
mm.
willing to extend trust, because those are related to each other, but they're two separate things.
Well, that is a perfect segue. One of the things I love about your book is that you define trust. It's such an important concept. And yet, if you walked into a school and asked 20 different people, right, everyone knows what trust is, right? But you ask them what it was, you'd probably get 20 different answers. So tell us, how do you define trust? What are those five components?
So just exactly what you were mentioning. As I set out to study trust, there was almost no research about trust in schools. My advisor, Wayne Hoy, and a couple of his students had published a couple of studies in the late 80s and early 90s, but really it had fallen by the way. Nobody had done it. So in order to study trust, I needed to develop a literature. My literature review went far beyond the realm of education. And I quickly found out so if I was going to study trust, that I needed a definition. And yet across these different fields and even within fields, there seemed to be about as many definitions. If people even bothered to try to define trust, to articulate
Right.
that, there were about as many definitions as there were people doing research. So I started collecting all the definitions I could find, and sort of stirred them in a pot, did did some thematic analysis of that and came up with a composite definition of trust, that trust is a willingness to be vulnerable or a feeling at ease in a situation of interdependence, and that we take on that we sort of drop our defenses, drop our hypervigilance, or have a more willingness to be vulnerable in a situation of interdependence based on 5 kind of simultaneous assessments that we're making about this other person. Number one, are they benevolent? Which is there a sense of mutual goodwill? And like, I got your back and you got my back. And I feel comfortable that even if you could get ahead by stabbing me in the back, by mistreating me in some way, you would not do that. You would forego that benefit because there is an abiding sense of care for me and an abiding sense of care for our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So that is core.
Mm-hmm.
But also, is the person honest? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are they just pretending to care about me? Uh, you know, but is there integrity? As soon as we see that there starts to be a gap between what somebody says and then their actions, as soon as we get some daylight between their walk and their talk,
Mm-hmm.
we up goes the defenses again. We become hypervigilant again, like, what's going on? Why are they doing that? So
Mm.
there's a sense of integrity, honesty, authenticity, which
Mm.
is, and with this is a big one for school leaders, because I think especially people who are a little bit insecure in their role, they get moved into a leadership role and they're not quite sure how to conduct themselves, kind of can sort of play a role, put on a persona of leadership that feels strange
Mhm.
to people they're leading, often like, who is this person? And if they're just playing a role, how might they act? If they're not being guided by a sense of humanity and authentic kind of care, then I'm not sure who they are. I'm not sure I'm really comfortable with that. In the leadership realm, trust, we're also looking for a sense of openness, that
Mm.
people are not hiding. Now, of course, leaders are become in possession of things that are confidential, and they have to keep those,
Mm.
uh, and not a sense of openness around that, but that they're open with information to the extent that they can share, because
Sure.
there are leaders who withhold information
Oh
as
yeah.
a way of playing power games, of being
Yeah.
in the know and keeping other people out of the know, to enhance their own power.
In the
And
pandemic, I think
also,
we saw a lot of that where families, teachers, thought leaders had much more information than they did, and probably would have helped if they just said, I just don't know.
yes, or I know, and there's reasons that I can't share it,
Yes.
whatever, but just being honest about that.
Hmm.
But it's also, from a leadership perspective, is about being open with decision-making authority.
Mm.
Authentic, not phony shared decision-making.
Yep.
What we have a lot, not only in schools, but all organizations, is a lot of phony shared decision-making. We call it contrived collaboration. It's
Yeah.
like, bring
Right.
everybody into the room. I just want your input on this decision. But the longer the conversation goes on, the more people get the sense, oh, the decision is already made. What they're trying to do is fool us into thinking that we had a say because we'll be more compliant that way.
Right. Right.
So
Right. Instead, be clear. We're having a conversation because we are each going to have an equal vote in the next step, or we're having a conversation because you are going to have some advice and I am going to have the final word, or whatever the decision making
exactly,
structure is.
exactly, have clarity about that. And then also openness can mean not micromanaging. If you're going to delegate something, then don't micromanage it.
Oh yeah.
Just have some openness around that as well. So those things are particularly important in relationships with leaders. We haven't found openness to be as important in the teacher-student relationship because there's not the same expectation that's the
Sure.
quality of information that will be shared.
Sure, and we'll get to that. You also talked about the quality of reliability, and I've heard a lot from leaders, walking the walk. You say you're going to do something, do it, follow up on that.
Exactly. And that as leaders, that really may entail building systems, whether
Mhm.
keep, a note paper with you, or you have your phone, a place where you write down the things that you've said you would get back to, a piece of information or whatever you've said, that you create systems that go beyond just trying to remember all of the myriad things that come at you in the course of a day, because being reliable in your follow-up is really critically important.
Yeah, I've always been surprised at the connection between reliability and organization. That, most leaders, they know they have to be organized, they don't value it so much, but it is absolutely connected to, you're walking down a hall and a teacher says, hey, Jen, can you send me that great article about trust? And I say, sure. And I never do that because I haven't bothered to write it down or whatever my system is for remembering. So that's.
Exactly, exactly
And
that.
then another piece that you've talked about in your writing that's connected to trust that surprised me a little bit and maybe seems contradictory with the openness is the confidence. How
Mhm.
important is it to, how important is being good at one's job to having people trust you?
It's extremely important because, and particularly people in a leadership role, your followers, the constituents, are so vulnerable to your doing a good job. So if you're not able to do that, they may like you. This is an area where we really see the separation between liking and trusting. They may
Mm,
think you're just a wonderful, warm, sweet person, but they
mm,
don't trust you. And we saw this in my book. I talked about three different principals who I encountered in my studies. But one was Fred, who was the principal of an elementary school in an urban area. And he was a real sweet guy. People liked him, but he wanted to be liked so much that he was not competent or confident about dealing with conflict. And that's part of the job that comes with the territory. And so he tried delegating it away to his teacher's council and whatever, but he did not deal effectively with the multiple conflicts in his school building, which then allowed them to fester and grow until there was really a toxic environment in his school. So I think everybody I talked to acknowledged he was a nice guy, but in a way he was too nice.
mhm.
Uh, the niceness sort of covered for a lack of competence in dealing effectively with conflict.
And I'm sure many people can conjure up that type of that Fred image of the nice leader or even the nice teacher, right? Who is almost trying
Mhm.
to be like one of the kids, but not really setting boundaries and demonstrating competence and follow through and holding kids to task, But
Exactly.
so what is some low hanging fruit if we're talking about the principal um, doing something? What could a principal do tomorrow or the next day to help build the teachers' trust in them? What are some small actions that you think really make a difference when it comes to trust?
Well, first, I want to say you have the most promising window of opportunity is early on in the relationship.
Mm,
In the first few hours and days and weeks
mm,
are are really your opportunity to demonstrate trustworthiness. And it many leaders want to hit the ground running. They come into a new system and it's like, okay, chop chop, we're here to make change,
yeah.
and they feel pressure. Oftentimes they've been hired to make change of some kind to improve outcomes, and in that impatience they're not willing to take the time
Mm,
to really foster trust right up front. So this is a situation where you go slow to go fast.
mm,
Go a little slow at the beginning and really get to know people, show an interest in who they are as people, not as pawns in a chess game. that
Mm,
you have in mind sort of, here's my vision, but you haven't given other people the opportunity to participate in the vision building or to have a say. So, so taking the time to really listen well and have people feel heard,
mm,
that can help establish that sense of benevolence, that I'm not here to do you harm. I will, really here to be in partnership and to work together, as well as demonstrating competence
mhm,
of um, by offering genuinely helpful advice to teachers. If you're supervising teachers and you're, working with a teacher who's struggling in some way, to offer something that is of value to them. Tony Bright and Barbara Schneider, in their study in the early 2000s about trust, one of the other early pieces of research about this, found that in the urban context where their study took place, that when principals came in and dealt with the troublesome teachers, the underperforming teachers in a school effectively, and either to give them the opportunity to improve, give them some very clear, specific opportunities to get better, but then to hold them accountable if they didn't, was one of the strongest things that they could do to build trust. It's like finally somebody has noticed that this colleague down the hall is not doing their job. And the rest of us are having to pay the consequences of that.
I was just running some leadership groups called masterminds, and we were talking about difficult conversations and the idea that holding a teacher accountable who is not serving students well, it is absolutely about the students and the teacher, but it also impacts, like you said, all the other teachers around who are watching. And whether that teacher isn't serving students well or showing up late or shirking professional responsibilities, all eyes. I mean, that is definitely one of the ways to build trust is by dealing with them appropriately. And I appreciate your other examples too, right? Treating teachers like whole people, not like pawns in a chess game. And I think the teachers do often feel like, oh, the principal just moved me to third grade because there was an opening, but my expertise is in first grade, or
Mhm.
and having them not just listening, but ensuring they feel heard. I often talk about, I completely agree with you. I think that's got to be one of the biggest superpowers a leader can have is to truly listen, and then yes, to be involved in the participation. Education is a weird field where you have all the teachers sort of on this one level and then the principal up there, and a lot of teachers have been around for a long time and or they're new, but they have many ideas and should be involved, and it builds trust and it keeps them in the position. So these are some
Yeah.
great starting ideas. We are recording this podcast midway through the year, and I assume many leaders at this point in the year are seeing examples of broken trust in their schools. And I hadn't really heard this before, but you described two types of trust betrayals: the personal and the structural. Do you think you could describe what these are so school leaders can be on the lookout for a personal betrayal versus a structural?
Well, I think all of us at the personal level, can think about times and places, that we have felt betrayed, that somebody that we thought that we had a shared understanding, that we had shared trust, that we had that sense of mutual goodwill, and then they've done something that violates that sense of care. Um, in the context of leaders, it can be just a little tricky because sometimes we just have to make hard decisions. There's only so much in the budget, and we can't fund, all of the requests that have come to us. And so some people are going to be disappointed,
Sure.
but being disappointed doesn't have to be a betrayal.
Mm,
If we if we go to those that we know are going to be disappointed in the decisions that we've made,
mm,
and acknowledge, I know this is hard for you, that and perhaps offer an explanation of, these are the things I had to weigh out, and this is a decision I made. So that's where I think openness is also a factor when we get between a rock and a hard place and we have to make a decision that we know is going to betray somebody.
Mm.
At the structural level, I think we need to recognize that we are in a particularly challenging moment in history where trust in all of our institutions
Mm.
is diminished.
Yes.
And then that includes schools. And we as educators want to say, hey, wait a minute, we're the good guys. They're like, we're working hard to support the learning of other people's children. It's like we're not the ones getting rich. We're not the ones embezzling any funds or anything, but we're being caught up in this broader societal diminishment in trust.
Yes.
And I think the pandemic accelerated that. At the beginning, parents had their own children at home. We're like, how do you do with 25 of these? We're like, this is hard enough just to have two,
Exactly. Yes.
So I think at the beginning there was some real empathy for educators.
Yeah.
But that as that went on and it was just increasingly difficult for families, that soured and had made it particularly difficult. So I think it's really hard not to get our feelings hurt
Yes.
by the lack of trust just in education writ large and educators. It's hard not to take it personally,
Yeah.
but we need to recognize that this is part of a broader societal level shift in the way our world's working, and we're in a time of transition
Yes.
that
That's part of
is
why I wanted to talk to you at this point in history. Yes.
yes, it is, and it's really crucially important. The OECD invited me over to give a talk. They're quite concerned about trust on a societal level,
Yes.
across the OECD countries, and we're imagining school might be our last best hope
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Well, schools are microcosms of
rebuilding.
society, right? So,
Yes.
we'll get back to some of the other building trust, but let's stay on the betrayal of trust. One of the things I liked in your book is that you had two ways to address the betrayal of trust, right? So you don't just define it like an academic, but you give us solutions. And one of them is if, for example, the leader betrays the trust at school, you talk about these 4 A's of absolution. This is apology attempt, which I will save if people want to look at the book. But then you talk about the second scenario where there's sort of a larger school-wide atmosphere of low trust, which is very possible in this low trust time, as you've just said. And you talk about the idea of bringing the school through the 4 steps or the 4 I's of appreciative inquiry. So could you share those 4 steps for people who might be feeling, I think the trust at our school is overall kind of low, more than just me or one person having, betrayed the trust of others?
Yes. So, appreciative inquiry is such a powerful process. It's a way of bringing a group of people together to do some collective dreaming, imagining of a way forward. And I have found it to be the most powerful tool that I am aware of in terms of building a sense of collective trust in a school building,
Mm,
because it is deeply participatory.
mm,
The challenge for us as leaders is to use this process to try to find as broad a level of participation within the organization as we can. Where most planning processes or problem solving processes revolve around just a small group of
mm,
handpicked leaders who
mm.
then go away off to some beautiful retreat center, whatever, sit around a conference table, which, face it, only has so many chairs around the table. And
Yes.
then even the conversation, once the conversation starts, some voices are going to be dominant, some others are silenced.
Yeah.
So we're only getting a very narrow slice of the perceptions of the whole, where appreciative inquiry solves the problem of limited airtime, so to speak, by just breaking apart, just forgetting about that conference table
Mm,
and pairing people up so that it starts out with shared inquiry of interviewing one another around the issues that are most deeply connected to their heart. What matters to them about the work they do? What have been their best experiences doing this work? And through that, we sift through and find out what are our collective values, and from those we build a vision, and um, for how we might go forward. What would a improved state, what would our ideal state look like?
mm,
And
mm.
then how do we get there? What steps could we take to build that? And
Lovely.
this idea that we have a shared vision that grows out of the stories that each of us have told
Mm,
back in those paired interviews. So the process starts with initiate. That's the first I,
yep.
is about choosing. Appreciative inquiry is a method that we will use. We're going to take a strengths-based approach rather than a rehashing of all of our difficulties and painful parts of our past.
Right.
So
So, for
that's
example, let's talk about how we can build more trust in school. That might be your
exactly
initiating a conversation. Yes. And then the next
exactly.
step is the inquiring.
Yes. So as part of the initiate, then we would frame a group of a set of the interview questions, and we would field test those. And
Okay.
then we would take them to the group as a whole, however process we want to use to pair people up, whether we let them choose somebody, we invite them to
Hmm.
choose to partner with somebody who they don't see or talk to, or
Mm,
on a daily basis, but maybe somebody they don't know as well. The
mm,
rationale for that is that we get insights from diverse parts of the organization coming together, and then whatever we cook up,
mm,
those get spread back. So it's a diffusion strategy.
mm,
So people interview each other, then they come together in small groups and share their partner story.
hmm.
And when I first was reading about appreciative inquiry, I thought, oh, that's clever. It'll be more concise when their partner tells it, and that may happen. But when I my first time going through an appreciative inquiry process is like, oh no, that's not the reason. It's because it feels wonderful to be heard, to have
Yes.
something you've just opened your heart to and
Yes.
share, to say, well, Megan had this experience, this beautiful experience that blah, blah, blah. And here's some things that she really values and are important to her. And
And
here's her
part
vision
of
for the
healing and
future.
improving process is just feeling heard. Yeah.
It really is. Yes, it's so powerful. And from those, in those small groups, after those stories are told, you identify a set of themes that
Mm,
then move forward to the whole group.
hmm.
We look for patterns, themes that have emerged from a lot of the small groups,
Mm,
uh, and decide which we want to go forward with. And then we begin to imagine a new future.
mm.
Uh,
Another I, the imagine. Yeah.
Another I, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so how do we go forward? What would the ideal state look like? So we begin to dream about that. If all these things we talked about, these things that we value, were were to come to fruition, what would that look like and
Mm,
sound like, feel like? And through that process, we start with a creative process where we come up with metaphors, and whether we do skits or little musical pieces, or what we illustrate what that would
mhm,
look like and sound like.
mm,
And then only after we've sort of done this holistic right brain creative process collectively, because it's in that wrestling with how will we convey this to our
yeah.
audience, what we're dreaming of, what we're hoping for, and then articulating some statements, some claims about this future state as if it was already true. So sometimes these are called provocative propositions or possibility statements, but
Mm,
we talk about it in the present tense as if that was already true. And in doing so, we make it just a little more true,
Mm,
even this moment
like
before
you
we
can see it. Yeah.
yeah, but we can see it and we're
Mm,
holding this collectively.
hmm Yeah. And the innovating is the plan of action. So yeah, so people
Yeah,
should look into appreciative inquiry if you're feeling there's a feeling of low trust in your school. Um,
absolutely.
yes.
It's my strongest recommendation for how to rebuild trust. And I have seen it work in really powerful ways.
I wanted to, so you at the beginning of the podcast talked about lots of different types of trust. It's not just, the principal develops trust with the teachers, with the faculty. It's also so many other levels, right? Like teacher trust or teacher student. So if our listeners, if they're principals, what can a principal do about teacher to teacher trust or teacher to student trust? Are there any moves or strategies that you have for developing that type of trust?
Yes, but and I think it goes back to that competence,
Mm,
helping to both intervene where there are disruptions, to mediate conflicts, to support the development so that teachers bolster their capacity, their skills for dealing with conflict as well, but
mm,
also to be putting into place structures where teachers can collaborate with each other,
mm.
and share good ideas and celebrate each other's successes.
So
In oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so it sounds like a combination of skill building, right? Training teachers to be better at building trust and collaborate. Those are skills they need, but then a structural approach, they also need the time or the meeting space to be able to actually come together.
Exactly, exactly. And there's, we're for more than 2 decades have been trying to build professional learning communities and critical friends groups, various ways to structure teachers to come together. It's not always easy.
Yeah.
There sometimes needs to be both some articulating of norms, but also the defending of norms.
Mm,
Something should happen if those norms are broken.
hmm
Um, and
Yeah.
so having constructive ways of intervening when those norms are broken.
Or even better, if the teachers themselves are intervening when norms are broken.
Exactly. That's when, as a leader, you've really won the culture uh, initiative, or how you can win the culture of the school is when you're not the only one defending the norms, when the teachers defend the norms with each other.
And I think sometimes leaders shy away from making really clear expectations about interpersonal treatment and norms because they feel like people should know that, right? Like really, do I need to say, no interrupting or, challenge ideas and not people? But we do, I mean, most of us didn't learn those types of skills in regular K-12 school, let alone teacher school or principal school. So I think we do need to be really explicit about how we expect people to interact, both teacher to teacher, teacher to student, and we have to model that as well. I mean, there's nothing worse than a principal espousing the values of building trust and then breaking them with their actions.
Absolutely. And I think also just starting with the assumption that people are doing the best they know how to do.
Mm,
And so start with an assumption of goodwill. And even if somebody is, quote unquote, misbehaving, interrupting in ways that other people are not enjoying, or uh, challenging others, their colleagues, in ways that feel like personal attacks, um, that they need some skill building, and
yeah.
I think we as educational leaders need to think about how are we leading our classroom? How are we, if we think of the adults as our students, how are we helping and supporting them to gain the skills that they need?
Mm. So if this is all a lot to do and leaders are feeling a little overwhelmed, is there one thing they could do to start? If they're listening to this in the evening or over a break and they go into school, is there one small piece of low-hanging fruit they could do to try something new or different to build trust? that stands out in your mind as something that, just something small they could start to have an easy or a quick win?
Well, appreciative inquiry is a philosophy as much as it is a set of strategies or skills. So
Mm,
what I described is how appreciative inquiry can be used as a large group,
mm,
a whole group intervention.
mm,
Uh, but you can take that strengths-based orientation right from the start, and you can take a coaching orientation in your leadership in
mm,
ways that build people up
mm,
and affirm the positive things that they're doing. So I think of appreciative inquiry as going on a treasure hunt for those things that affirm and bolster and build our core values. So
mm,
I think even if there are plenty of things that you as a leader would like to see changed, there's improvements you'd like to have made, but I think taking an orientation of let me look for those really there's diamonds in the rough, for those places where things are really happening in the ways that, so little glimmers of this new reality, just to be intentional about calling them out, expressing appreciation, just noticing that was so skillful the way
mm,
that you handled that child, and whatever redirected that, or that, oh, your illustration class was brilliant.
mm.
So I think being somebody who teachers light up when they see you in their doorway, rather than feel clenched up, a little bit frightened of what's going to happen next. But
Be an illuminator. Yeah. So tomorrow
exactly.
your homework is to go on a treasure hunt and find things that are working well. Take a strengths-based approach as opposed to looking for the aims on the board or, students being engaged. For one, let's just focus on do a treasure hunt for what's working well. I love that. Let's end with that note. Can you just share with our listeners where they can find you? I know you most mentioned coaching. I think you, together with your husband Bob, you've published 2 books on coaching. So if people want more information about you or your books, where would you like to send them?
Okay, so our website for our coaching work is schooltransformation.com, because our book is called Evocative Coaching, Transforming Schools One Conversation at a Time, really saying how important those one-on-one conversations are and taking a coaching orientation. But if you want to email me, my email address is mx, me and Malcolm have mxtsch@wm.edu. And I would love to hear from you if there's ways that I can support you in bolstering the trust in schools, because truly we cannot fulfill our mission as educators without trust.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was a great conversation with you. This was Megan Tshannen-Moran who wrote Trust Matters, Leadership for Successful Schools. Thank you again for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you for this opportunity to share.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.